Good morning. It's Pop again. Dennis Murray. Oh goodness, I have to move this mic over here. Hold on just a second. Uh, Boy, there's so many small things to remember. At least the mic is on today, and my glasses are off, so it's all good. We'll just move right along. So today is Popcast 54, Nature's Wisdom, Part 4. And I need to focus on the variety of wisdom that nature has given humans. And I think that the same reason that nature finds variety useful applies to human wisdom. There isn't a single wisdom that all humans hold. There's a lot of variety, and circumstances may show in due time that one set of one variety of wisdom was more suited to the next changes coming than another. I I view my own offerings as a variety of wisdom, and I don't claim that everyone has to agree with me. I don't claim that there's not any other contradictory point of view that might have some wisdom in it. And I was kind of reminded by yesterday's talk of this because when I looked at my notes this morning for today, I suddenly realized that I had failed to establish a very important point yesterday, and it relates to the variety of wisdom. So, not I was going to talk about more about trees, particularly the chestnut tree and the oak tree, and but I'm going to go right to um, this subject that came up that I needed to clarify about yesterday. So I was talking yesterday about universals, and I said uh, Walter Lippmann was, sort of one of my heroes, and that I read his book, and he talked about what he called natural law, by which he meant that there were universals that reasonable, thoughtful men could agree to about the form of government and the fundamental laws of society. And of course, there'd be lots of laws about smaller subjects that would be widely varied from community to community. But he felt that there were universals that would lead to agreement across humanity as to form of government and major laws. And circumstances have proved him wrong about that. And I talked about he was right that there were universals, but they were fewer than he thought. They just the universal experience of awe and the universal call that that experience gives us to live in fruitful relation to each other. What I failed to clarify was that the universals I'm talking about come from our psychology. There's psychological universals. I'm not offering that I could prove that they're uh, uh, valid outside of our psychology. On the contrary, my point is that they're valid inside our psychology, and we live from inside our psychology. Um, we don't, but Lippmann was talking about things that are able to be proven objectively, proven, to exist outside our psychology. And essentially, objective, subjective means, objective is things you can prove, like the distance to the moon and you know, the angle you have to have for a rocket ship if you want to reach, Earth orbit. I mean, these things are capable of external proof, and but things inside our psychology are very real to us, real enough for us to trust them enough to live by them. So they're as real as real could be in the most important arena of our lives, our psychological arena. But it turns out you can't even prove that you exist as an external reality that you've got the kind of proof for, like how far the moon is. That kind of proof doesn't exist for these important things that are partly subjective and partly objective. You can use some objectivity about should I trust this subjective feeling of awe, and that gives me the energy of hope and gives me the direction of, well, live in relation to each other. Should I trust that? Your psychology is screaming, yes, trust it. So you can stop for a moment and use some of your objective skills to think about whether that's reasonable and what evidence, if any, of an objective nature might exist. So history gives us some objective evidence, and possibilities for the future and your own life experiences. These are all sources of objective evidence. And as teenagers and perhaps as young people and perhaps when you're getting older, you might have a look at these things. And in my opinion, my version of wisdom for humans, you'll find that it's reasonable for you to trust these things enough to live by them, remembering that they're intuitions. They come from deep in our psychology as compared to objective truths. And so your intuition is there's from this all. The experience of all gives you an intuition that there's some creative goodness at work in the universe. So you decide to believe that that's an external reality, that it exists outside of our psychology and is causing us to have this psychology that experiences awe and lives from that experience. You can't prove that by objective data, but you can prove that it's reasonable for you to form that opinion, have that intuition, and hold to it. And other people can say, well, they've reached a different intuition. They think that, oh, it's just entirely in the psychology. There's no external reality behind it. Okay, that's the intuition they've reached, but they can't prove that either. And then, there's those in the middle that have an intuition that it's an external reality, but when you want to personify it and give it one of the names of God, they don't agree to that. They think, well, it's hard to say if it's a person or not, but I do think it's an objective reality, they say. So there's three different responses to this objective reality, another of the variety of nature's wisdom. The point is, all three are within the realm of reason, and all are in the whole realm of psychological universals. And it's very important to distinguish that until, as far as I know, I'm the first person to talk in these terms about natural law. Well, of course, one hopes there's plenty of other people out there that we haven't found each other yet, and we will in due time. But as far as I know, the conversation for the last 2,500 years has been based on an attempt to find objective realities. The Greeks talked about natural law, the ancient Greeks, Aristotle and that whole basil of folks. And they talked a lot about it, and it was very important. The Romans, talked about it, and they used it effectively in creating their civilization. And, after the Dark Ages, when the universities began bringing education back to Western Europe. Aristotle and I don't mean Aristotle, Aquinas and the Renaissance that followed. The natural law has been spoken about for a very long time in lots and lots of ways. But in all instances, they were talking about something that they hoped could be proven as an external reality by objective methods, and that everyone would be essentially intellectually obliged to accept is a proven fact. And I'm saying we've learned enough about human psychology in the past century and a half or so that we've, begun working pretty hard on psychology. That we now and we've worked on logic and brought it into philosophy extensively, so that in logic, in philosophy, in science, we've essentially accepted that we can't even prove we exist. We can't prove that the other fellow exists. We can't prove what reality is. In all honesty, even our scientists have no real clue what reality is. And you may recall there was a time not long ago when people thought a chair was real. Aristotle thought that. Everybody else from him till now thought that. And then, lo and behold, somebody said, well, actually, no, it's a whole lot of void spaces inside of atoms that tend to give you the impression of solidity, but it's not solid. It's mostly voids. And well, it was kind of shocking. The point being that from at Lippmann's time, it still was debatable as to whether there were things that could be proven objectively, important things that would be necessary for there to be universals. Things like people actually exist and I can prove it. And, reality is this, that, or the other, and I can prove it. And now largely that's gone. But I'm saying that in effect, that loss of objective reality has left us with a proper focus on subjective reality. And it turns out that we live from our subjective reality. So that's a really great loss to have suffered, because it lets us focus our attention on what does survive all of the things that we can no longer prove. And what survives is our psychology is very real feeling to us. And we very much find that we have every reasonable right to live by the feelings that our psychology gives us, the feelings of there being awe, and the feelings of being led to each other for comfort and support in the face of our awareness of death, of hate, of necessity, and of unfairness in the universe. So I really felt yesterday when I said, I agreed with Lippmann that there were some universals. I really needed to clarify that he was talking about externally provable, objective universals. And I think he was completely wrong. There aren't any of those. And that's my version of nature's wisdom. There aren't any of those objective, provable universals. But there are subjective universals that come in our psychology, and they seem increasingly to have evidence of in support of them. A lot of scientists and psychologists and other people in related fields are looking hard at what's going on inside us, and it seems like evidence is slowly being acquired in support of what I'm saying. I didn't originate it; it just occurred to me. I mean, I'm not claiming that I'm a forerunner of the future. I just saw all these things falling away, and then I was looking for something that might be left that could be useful to us. um, because we need to have something. And I realized, well, wait a minute, what about this? And so I started thinking in those terms. And then I looked around in the writings of psychologists and scientists, and it seems like there's growing support for thinking in those terms, thinking that we live from our psychology and there's adequate reason for us to trust our psychology enough to live by it. And essentially, it gives us the two things that we really need to have. It gives us energy in the form of the energy of hope that comes from the inspiration that comes from this experience of awe. And it gives us direction in that it doesn't map out all of the things that you should do and not do, but it says turn to each other. And that's more than adequate direction. All the rest is details, and you'll negotiate those as best you can. They can't be that important, or nature would have provided us a clue for them. Um, and nature would prefer to keep a variety of things, so a variety of wisdom as well. So that's my variety of wisdom. Others are going to strongly disagree. Um, it's early days for this version of this variety of wisdom. Um, we didn't really know anything about psychology until barely 150 years ago. And it was really only with Freud and Jung that we started getting serious. And in my opinion, Freud led us into some new ways of thinking, but many of what he thought was of little use. Jung opened some much deeper doors that I think are much more useful for us. But there's a huge amount of psychology that's being done that's doesn't owe its existence to Freud or Jung, and there's good reason to hope that as the years go by, there'll be more support for this intuition that we are reasonable to live by, our intuition of awe and our intuition of being called to each other. So sorry, a lot of repeating. We've covered this material before, but not this specific point, drawing your attention to the difference between an objective reality, such as Lippmann was talking about, and all the other philosophers and thinkers going all the way back to Aristotle have been thinking about, to a psychological reality, which is essentially a very modern invention, and I think a more than adequate substitute. What we lost when we lost this consensus about an external reality was we lost public morals. The community had, some ideas in sufficient detail to know what things are expected of us in terms of what we owe the public, what we owe, each other. Private morality, a different matter from public morality. How you affect the community by your behavior. So when we lost this consensus about natural law, and it takes the form of religion most often in practical lives. When we stopped having support for that, then we lost public morality to a large degree, and so that it also led to a huge growth of atheism, particularly among scientists and intellectuals. And it's complicated as to how that came about, but the effect was that, the rest of us in the community were feeling very much something was missing. And like I said in earlier talks, as a child, it was made plain to me by my parents and teachers that something was missing, and that was very difficult. And like, Jung said, you really have to have a community understanding of things for the community to thrive. And it has to start with an inspiration. So I think I'm trying to, my wisdom is to try and restore that by using our psychology as the source of that inspiration and the source of that guidance that will reestablish public morality, some general ideas worked out after much negotiation that private behavior has a community effect, and therefore we have a legitimate concern to strongly encourage some private behaviors and strongly discourage others. And it leaves people free to be atheists, but it keeps that lack of life having any meaning that atheism is so identified with from filling the air. You can choose to live in a room with atheist air if that's the room you choose to live in. But we don't want the community air to be deprived of meaning. And unfortunately, that is the effect of atheism. Um, I really think we need meaning, and I view it somewhat as my job to try and find some support for the meaning that clings inside the hearts and souls of the great majority of us, even atheists. I mean, one of the most prominent atheists expressly longed for belief because it seemed so necessary for people to have it. And he thought, well, maybe we ought to just act as if we have it because of the comfort and clarity it gives us in our actions, even though we don't believe that we have it. And so, sorry, soapbox today. Rome's not built in a day. I keep forgetting. Okay, take care. See you tomorrow. Bye bye. Oh, yeah, happy birthday to Max Marginot, my little doggy friend in France. Bon anniversaire. Woof, woof, arf, arf. um, he's a dog, and my friend Chantal owns him. And she put him on Facebook as if he were a person. And so they sent me a note this morning that it's Max Marginot's birthday. Sometimes all the silly stuff really adds a lot to life. Okay, take care.